Morning. I'd like to call the Kankakee County Board meeting for December 14th to order. Today's invocation is from Sam Payton.
Lord, as we gather today at this meeting, we ask that you would be in our midst. Help us to make decisions that will be pleasing to you in our community. Give us clear minds and peaceful hearts. Take our lives and use us to love and serve you, and also all the people of Kankakee County. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Amen. And please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If we can get a roll call, Mr. Henderson, please.
Mr. Hess. Mr. Tholen. Mrs. Polk.
Present.
Mr. Snipes.
Present.
Mr. Seroy.
Present.
Mr. Lear.
Present.
Mrs. Weber.
Present.
Mrs. Peters. Mr. Payton.
Present.
Mrs. Parker. Mr. Fairfield.
Present.
Mr. Carrico.
Present.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Present.
Mr. Swanson. Mr. Featherling.
Present.
Mr. Donnell.
Present.
Mr. Miller.
Present.
Mr. Long.
Present.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Present.
Mr. Hunter. Ms. Bryan.
Here. Present.
Mr. Collins. Ms. Hudson.
Present.
Mr. Smith.
Present.
Mr. Alexander Hildebrand.
Present.
Mr. Gowler.
Present.
Mr. Raymond.
Present.
Mr. Wheeler.
Present.
We have quorum.
All right, we have a quorum. I have nothing under public commentary today. Is that slide ready? I just wanted to share something before we get going today because it got asked of me in a different format. Just a piece of information for the board and for the public. We're going to get into a full year-end wrap-up here next month. Jasmine's working on that, but total to date, we've allocated $4.37 million of ARPA funds, and so far, 4.22 million of that, which is 97%. is allocated on things that the local taxpayers would have had to pay for, like voting machines. Those were no longer being supported, and without ARPA, we would have had to pull that $1.22 million out of our local taxpayers' pocket instead of using the allocation from the federal government. So as I went through and analyzed this, we started to stratify this data, and I wanted to tell the board that you're spending money on things that are saving the local taxpayers money today, tomorrow, and down the road. And so I wanted to thank you for that approach, because I think that's what people expect of us. And we've also saved, you know, if you look at it, we've saved the taxpayers that $4.22 million so far by using ARPA money instead of their money. We've also, with all of that, we've helped 20 for-profit, not-for-profit businesses, and that's so far. We're just starting. And so the total remaining is almost 80% of the money, which is $17 million roughly. So this is just a snapshot of about a week ago. I want to at least let you know where we're at. And as I mentioned, Jasmine's working on a larger presentation as kind of a document year-end wrap-up. So we can move on from that unless there's any specific questions. You've been part of it. You've seen the things that we purchased, and it hasn't been just a waste of money. It's actually, we're spending federal money to alleviate the burden on our local taxpayers. So we'll move on if there's no questions. Under vacancy appointments, don't have any. Proclamation, Dan, if we can get that read into the record, please.
Be delighted to. Proclamation of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois, honoring the 2021 Kankakee High School K's football team for the historic run to the IHSA Class 5A State Football Tournament Finals. Whereas the 2021 Kankakee High School K's football team completed a historic run to the IHSA Class 5 football finals on November 27th, 2021, bringing home the state runner-up trophy. Whereas the 2021 Kankakee High School K's football team was the first Kankakee High School football team to ever reach the state finals in over 100 years of Kankakee High School history. And whereas the 2021 Kankakee High School K's football team set a school record by winning 13 straight games. And whereas the 2021 High School K's football team earned the Southland Athletic Conference Championship for the first time in over 20 years. And whereas the 2021 Kankakee High School K's football team's coach, Derek Hart, was named the Chicago Bears High School Coach of the Week for the K's victory over Crete-Monee. Whereas the 2021 Kankakee High School K's football team's Tomel Staples broke every passing record in Kankakee High School history. And whereas the 2021 Kankakee High School K's football team's Pierre Allen broke every pass receiving record in Kankakee High School history. Whereas the 2021 Kankakee High School K's football team's Marcus Covington became the Kankakee High School single season and career sack leader. And whereas the 2021 Kankakee High School K's football team was truly a family, as demonstrated by key contributions by cousins Jair Hill, Nate Hill, and Naz Hill during the team's historic run. And whereas the 2021 Kankakee High School K's football team served as a unifying force for the community. Now therefore be it proclaimed that the Kankakee County Board is pleased to recognize and honor the historic achievements of the 2021 Kankakee High School K's football team by proclaiming Tuesday, December 14th, 2021 as the 2021 Kankakee High School K's football team day in the county of Kankakee.
Thank you, Dan. Is there someone from the city or District 111 that would like to make that motion? Ms. Hudson? Is that the motion? Second? Ms. Polk with a second. Any comments from anyone in the group? With that, we'll do the motion, but then maybe the coach and I don't know how we can fit everybody up here, but maybe if there's some captains in the room, join as many as we can up over here. Then we'll say something on the mic. So all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. And if those board members from Kankakee would like to join the coach and however many he feels appropriate.
Get them all.
And it could be everybody. Just we'll line them all the way down the hallway. It doesn't matter. Yeah. This is your moment. So. All right. Well, here, let me turn that. Is that mic right behind you? There you go. If you have any comments, Coach? Do you have any comments?
Just real quick, I'd like to say just thank you guys. We're really proud of the community support we got, throughout the playoffs and really throughout the season. It really helped us kind of push through. And, obviously I'm really proud of these kids for what they did all year long. Not only on the field, but representing, our community in a positive manner. So thank you guys.
Thank you. Jim, could you? If you could stay for just 1 second, we're gonna snap a picture. We can't get everybody in. Got it? Thanks so much. Congratulations.
Yeah, we do. All right. I don't.
Hang out here all day, you don't have to go back to class.
Yep. All righty, moving on. We have no certificates of appreciation at this point. Minutes of last meeting, November 9th, 2021. Is there a motion on that? Mr. Hunter? Second? Mr. Long? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Committee report. Or excuse me, Claims Committee.
Mr. Chairman and members of the County Board, your Committee on County Claims would beg leave to report they have examined the following claims presented and recommend payment. The clerk is hereby authorized and directed to issue orders to the several claimants. Total monthly claims of $8,114,191.17.
All right, is there a motion there on that? Mr. Lear, a second. Mr. Kirkstra. Any questions? Roll call vote.
Mr. Hess. Aye. Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes. Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Donnell.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hutter. Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
Mr. Gowler.
Aye.
Mr. Raymond. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Under department reports, please.
County Collector's Monthly Report for October 2021. Total cash and bank and investments, $912,630.09. Excuse me. Treasurer's Monthly Report for October 2021. Total cash and investments, $912,630.09. Coroner's Monthly Report for October 2021. Total calls 139, coroner's cases 17, autopsies 8, toxicology 8, donations 2, indigents 1, hospice 68, referral 52, cremation 67, 3 x-rays, 1 outside autopsy, 8 pending. The coroner's income summary report for October 2021, total of $7,164.42. Circuit Clerk Cash Book for month ending October 2021, total dispersed $274,794.46. Recorder's Monthly Report, $236,089.99. County Clerk's Monthly Report for October 2021, total of $25,978.61. Monthly Building Division Report, total permits 110, total fees $33,757. Monthly Building Division Report for October 2021, total permits 96, total fees of $94,567. Monthly Resolution List for December 2021, total to the county of $363,707.25. I didn't have an animal control report, I don't think. My apologies. Animal Control Monthly Report for October 2020. Total fees of $37,954. The IPTIP Building Fund, $8.01. Total animals handled, 181.
Is there a motion to combine and approve? Mr. Eckhoff, second. Mrs. Parker? All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Under this first consent agenda, is there any that need to be heard separately? Second time, any need to be heard separately? If not, motion to combine and approve would be in order. Mr. Long? Second, Mr. Miller? If we can get those read into the record, please.
The reappointment of William Bukowski to the Kankakee Regional Planning Commission. The reappointment of John Adams to the Kankakee County Historic Preservation Commission. The reappointment of Sherry Ebert to the Kankakee County Historic Preservation Commission. The reappointment of Catherine Langlois to the Kankakee County Historic Preservation Commission. The appointment of David Marcotte to the Spring Creek Drainage District. Resolution approving the honorary intersection for Reverend Lewis Barnes in Pembroke Township. Declaration of surplus in the Kankakee County Sheriff's Department. Resolution certifying names to take the examination for county engineer. Resolution amending the ordinance establishing civil fees and criminal and traffic assessments to be charged by the clerk of the circuit court to reflect the new and revised civil and criminal case categories.
Alrighty. We have a motion and a second, so it'll be a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Donnell.
Aye.
Mr. Miller. Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter. Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
Mr. Gowler.
Aye.
Mr. Raymond. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Moving on to highways and buildings. If we can get the title of that first one read in the...
Resolution for maintenance under the Illinois Highway Code 22-00000-00-GM.
Motion to approve on that one, please. With Mr. Smith Hudson with a second. So I just combined the two names into one. I apologize. Contraction, Benifer, yeah. Sorry. Roll call vote, please, on that.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dunhill.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter. Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
Mr. Gowler.
Aye.
Mr. Raymond. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. The next item, if we can get that title read in the record, please.
Resolution appropriating funds for the payment of the county engineer salary.
All righty, is there a motion to approve there? Mr. Hess, Carrico with a second. Any questions about that? Just something we have to do on a regular basis. And we will, when we've all, well, most of us know that Mr. Rogers is gonna be retiring. When we have somebody new in there, we'll have to do this again. It'll be obviously up to the consideration of the board, but this has to happen with every engineer. We have to have a resolution on that pay rate, so. The new one just wouldn't get what Mark had. I guess that's probably the best way to say it. So a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dunhill.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter. Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
Mr. Gowler.
Aye.
Mr. Raymond.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. 436, if we can get the title read in the record, please.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois regarding ZBA case 21-11, rezoning from A1 Agriculture District to A2 Agriculture Estate District in Section 10 of Norton Township.
All right. If we could start off with a motion to approve on this one.
So moved.
Let's see, Mr. Featherling, a second. I'm sorry, I saw a hand somewhere. Mr. Eckhoff. Briefly, do you have anything, any detail to run through? Did he give you? All right.
Okay. Ready?
Yep.
All right, this is a request to rezone from A1 agriculture to, wrong slide there. Should be the last two slides on that. That's it. A request to rezone a 3.11 acre parcel that includes a house and outbuildings from A1 agriculture to A2 agricultural estate. It's part of a 53.15 acre farm parcel. The owner, Owen Hertz, has passed away, and his family would like to keep the remaining farmland and sell the house. In order to accomplish this, rezoning would be appropriate. Went to Zoning Board of Appeals on 11/15, and they voted 5-0 to approve. PZA agreed. There were no objectors.
Alrighty. Any questions on this for Dell? All right. We have a motion and a second then. All those in favor, Mr. Kirkstra, did you? Oh, I'm sorry, I saw the hand. Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on to the next one.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois regarding Hungary Hill Subdivision, final plat.
So is there a motion to approve the final plat? Mr. Eckhoff, second. I'll go with Mr. Gowler. Is there any brief explanation? Could you tell them that, look, this hasn't come up since I've been on the board
I think
with the new subdivision.
The last subdivision was about 2010
Yeah.
or so. So we had to review some of our ordinances to make sure everything applied properly. This one here is fairly straightforward. It's a 6.52 acre lot. It's a one-lot subdivision, which makes it a minor subdivision. The lot actually already exists as a meets and bounds division, but Mr. Cotton, the owner of this, also owns the property outlined in blue, and that is a landlocked parcel that has no access to a road. He desired to create an easement to get to that parcel, which is what prompted the minor subdivision plat. So really nothing's changing other than the driveway is now going to be a private easement for access to that blue parcel. So they could be sold separately if needed. Okay. Went through the 45-day review period. There was only one comment, and that was from County Highway, and they requested that a note be added to the plat indicating the easement was not a public road, and that was done.
Okay. Any questions for Dell on this one? Got the motion in the second, so all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. And finally, the last item, we could read the title into the record. And
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois regarding the repeal of Kankakee County's agritourism ordinance, sections 121-99 and 121-100 of the Kankakee County zoning ordinance.
someone with a motion on that to get us going, please. We went through it in PZA.
So moved.
Let's go with the motion, Mr. Seroy, second, Mr. Featherling. Could you explain a little bit about where we're at with this, Dell?
Sure. The state legislature passed Public Act 102-0492, known as the Agricultural Experience Act, and it basically makes our agritourism ordinance unenforceable. So we need to repeal that. I have had meetings with the senator's staff to make some changes to the Agricultural Experience Act to better define what an experience is and what agriculture is, because it's a very vague, some very vague terms here. In fact, the entire act is only 2 paragraphs.
Yeah. It's basically, it needs a trailer bill to define everything. The good thing is senators asking us for our input, since we were one of the first to actually have this ordinance. So there is the protection involved for those doing these farm-to-table agricultural experiences, but there are no definitions like, you know, what does agricultural use mean? Is that a herb garden in a box next to your window, or is it an actual plot of a certain size? You see my point. You know, is there fire code and life safety and, you know, road access and all of those different things that you have to take into, you know, ADA, obviously.
Yeah.
All those different things that are not covered in the state law that have yet to be defined. So we're kind of in the middle land, but it requires us to repeal. Is that
Right. Yeah, I mean, the act clearly says that we cannot use zoning to regulate these type of uses, but it does not mention anything about building codes, floodplain ordinances, any of our other ordinances. So we want some clarification on that. And it says that, you know, it goes on to say that as long as the property's in agricultural production, well, what does that really mean? Is it 2 acres out of 50? Is it 50% of the site? We don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, so we just want to be able to regulate it properly.
Yep. And then encourage it to happen, because that's a big part of what our county is. We like it. I think most people like going to those places, and the people that have them like operating them, but does that mean, you know, a band at 2 o'clock in the morning for someone who used to play in bands, is that part of an agricultural experience, or is that an experience your neighbors don't like? So you see my point. Is it a campground? Is it a agricultural experience? So those definitions have to evolve.
Yeah, I believe
for us to know what to do.
I believe the county and the county board do support these type of uses, but we do want them to be safe. And there's a lot of questions about that.
So more to come. Mr. Lear?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand we're going to need to push forward the repeal of our ordinance. At this point, what does this mean for those agricultural establishments that are doing some of these activities? I know I've got at least one that I saw on Career Center Road that would be within my district, or just adjacent to it.
We actually only have one approved agritourism use, and that's in Yellowhead Township.
Okay.
So if there's something on Career Center Road that would, they're not operating under our ordinance.
Okay.
Okay.
hence some of the issues. When you try to do it the right way, it sometimes gets expensive. So we're trying to figure out exactly where that lies, you know. A good example would be is if the road's blocked by cars, how does an emergency vehicle get in there to pull somebody out that has had not the best experience? They have a health issue, or if there's a fire or something like that. Well, there's other things that have to come with that. It just can't be, well, we want to do this and have a restaurant in a rural area, so we'll call it an agricultural experience. That's not acceptable with health codes and life safety and all that other stuff. So, all right, so we have a motion and a second. No more questions? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. So the people doing this will have protection after 1/1. There is no ordinance. Is that how this is going to roll out?
The Public Act goes into effect 1/1, which by repealing this ordinance, the special use permit that we did issue would be repealed as well. So they can continue to operate until there's more clarification.
Unless they request a liquor license, and that opens up a whole new level of that I get to get involved in. So it's not necessarily a joy or a pleasure, because it's somewhat frustrating, but I think that's the only regulation that the county has is through the liquor ordinances at this point, which connect to the health department and other things that we're talking about
Having
here.
appropriate sanitary facilities and all of that. Yes.
Bathrooms, all that stuff. Okay, thanks, Del.
Yep.
Moving on, under finance, if we can get the title read in the record.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois, authorizing the purchase of county vehicles by the Sheriff's Department.
Is there a motion on this one to start with?
Polk.
Mr. Fairfield and then Ms. Polk with a second. For lack, it was just a price adjustment because we had to have the vehicles brought here rather than having a fleet of our own people. It was much cheaper to amend the resolution than to use the man hours to go pick up all these vehicles. So pretty accurate, Sheriff. Okay. We have a motion and a second. Any other questions? Roll call vote.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber. Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker. Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff. Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Donnell.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hodder.
Yes.
Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
Mr. Gowler.
Aye.
Mr. Raymond.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Just as I mentioned, that $415,000 is ARPA money. It's not our local taxpayers' money. So that's just another example of the things we're doing. 440, if we can get the title read in the record.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois regarding the tax year 2021 levy request.
Is there a motion on the levy? Mr. Lear to approve. Is there a second? Second, go with Mr. Payton. Any questions about the levy? We went through it in finance in detail. Just so everybody knows, you approved a budget that is supported by this levy, and one of the things to keep in mind is that when we look at the levy request this year, it was 2.5%. If we would have had to pay for those things like the voting machines and the vehicles, it would have not been 2.5, it would have been 5, and then we still would have had to reduce expenses. So I could tell you that we kept it down as low as we could. We had also mentioned that we passed a budget that did not include any ICE revenue. So I've had the question, what's the impact of ICE? We've already put it in the budget. So because we could not have a budget depending on things that we were not absolutely sure we were going to have in terms of revenue. So there's this levy supports that budget. Beyond that, please, any questions, comments? Roll call vote.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber. Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff. Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Donnell.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hodder. Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
Mr. Gowler. Mr. Raymond. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Motion carries. Thank you. Under the ARPA fund projects, this is the consent agenda. I just wanted to mention that number 444 is actually lost revenue. It's the wrong fund on there. So when we approve it, it's going to go to the lost revenue fund. The rest of them we're going to submit as noted on the sheet. So, you know, with all the rules not being completely defined by the Department of Treasury and how they're going to rule on these, we think that this is the correct place, but know that if it comes back and they say, no, it's not COVID fund eligible, then we could use lost revenue. And I believe, Steve, when is that first submission? January sometime?
The end of January.
End of January is still the first submission date to the Department of Treasury, which is what everybody's looking to validate their knowledge of the law and the processes and everything else. So there's a lot of things out there floating around. We're making really strong decisions, but this, just so you know, we think they're applicable to these funds. We don't run the risk of having to pay them back because we have the lost revenue fund at this point. But if you make large expenditures that are more than your lost revenue fund, that's where it gets dangerous, because then you would have to pay anything back out of the general fund. Does that make sense the way that I put it? We've got it back up in the lost revenue fund, and we're not spending 3 million here, 4 million there, 5 million there. The smaller amounts, we're able to test the waters with the Department of Treasury to make sure that the way we interpret this, rulings that don't exist yet, is in line with their intent in the law. So it's almost like very much like the Ag Experience Bill, it's being filled out as we go along with the details. So it makes it somewhat, I can see why people are hesitant to really jump in with both feet. So any other thoughts on that? I just want to make sure we're all understanding here. All right, anyone that needs to be pulled out and considered separately? Is there any one of these that anyone on the board wants to pull out and just handle it separate? Second time, and I'll give you a minute to look through them. There's a few. So do we have a motion to combine and approve as amended, as I spoke? Mr. Hunter, second. Mrs. Parker? All righty, if we can get them read into the record then.
Okay. Authorizing expenditure fiscal year 2021 Fund 95 America Rescue Plan for the following items: 3D Wildlife Rescue, Better Cut Lawn Care, Kankakee County Coroner, Kankakee County Sheriff Department full body scanner, Camp Shaw, D&D Distributing, Dunlap Vision, Harbor House, McElroy Communications, Sunrise Center, and out of the lost revenue fund, the Kankakee County Sheriff Department Gray Key Mobile Phone Forensics.
All righty. If we are ready, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Donnell.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter. Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
Mr. Gowler.
Aye.
Mr. Raymond.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Just feedback time. Is the process working for the board to make sure you're informed, know that all this has been vetted? The checklist you're getting, the cover sheets that describe the fund usage and approval or recommendations otherwise. I just want to make sure it seems like we've got it streamlined, because we're building this obviously as we go sometimes. It seems like we've got something that's both in-depth, informative, yet not mind-numbingly long in the meeting. So I hope that's okay, and please, any comments, suggestions, get a hold of me. But it seems like it's working for those that apply, and the processes that we have in the county to make sure we get the money out the door as quickly as possible. So, all right, moving on. These following openings?
One opening on the Clausen Park Drainage District, one opening on the Zoning Board of Appeals, one opening on the Exline Creek Drainage District, 2 openings on the McGillivray Special Drainage District, 2 openings on the Canavan Drainage District, 2 openings on the Mantino Number 9 Drainage District, 7 openings on the Kankakee County Regional Planning Commission.
Alrighty. Under new business, if we can get the title of the next one read in the record, please.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, State's Attorney's Appellate Prosecutor Program, fiscal year 2022.
There's a motion to approve there. Mr. Hess, second. Mr. Hunter? Is there any questions about this? It's every year, basically, use the Appellate Prosecutors Program for various things. It saves us quite a bit of money by doing it this way. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes. Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker. Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff. Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dunhill.
Aye.
Mr. Miller. Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter. Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
Mr. Gowler.
Aye.
Mr. Raymond. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Well, is there any other business? Old business? Anything? Anybody want to sit here for a half hour and make Jim wait? He's like halfway out the door. Make a motion, Mr. Hess. Is there a second? Mr. Kirkstra. All those in favor of adjourning, say aye. Those opposed, same sign. Have a great